Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 3 of our Gutenberg series, Extending Gutenberg. Your experts for today are Andrew Taylor, Developer Programs Engineer here at Pantheon, along with Josh Pollock, Founder at Caldera. Just a couple of housekeeping items to go over before we start. Please make sure you submit any questions you have during the presentation in the question window. We want to answer as many of your questions during the presentation as possible, so make sure you keep those coming. I'd now like to turn it over to Andrew and Josh.
Thanks, Atusa. So as she said, my name's Andrew Taylor here at Pantheon. I've been kind of heads down in Gutenberg for quite some time, figuring out what it means, not just for content we're creating, but for all of the folks who use WordPress on our platform. And I'm joined by Josh, who can tell us a little bit about what he's been doing with all this Gutenberg madness.
Hi, I'm Josh Pollock. I'm the lead developer for Caldera Forms, a drag and drop responsive form builder. And so we have a shortcode like a lot of people do. And so we've been since December slowly building from, bridge between shortcodes and blocks. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of going from a really quick block in the beginning to something that's more complicated and thinking ahead to how that becomes part of the larger application, not something that we've added on. So that's what I've been doing. It's fun.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's really, we're going to be looking more at the developer side today. So if you've missed some of our earlier webinars, maybe go check out some of those recordings if you need a primer on what Gutenberg is. But just a quick reminder, it is the new editor coming to WordPress. So this is showing an example of a map block. This is a plugin that developed here at Pantheon and kind of what I cut my teeth on Gutenberg with. But you can see that it's actually more of a WYSIWYG than traditional WordPress editor has been, where what you have saved on the back end is, pretty much what comes out on the front end, which is really, really nice. So here I have kind of a wide image, a short image, some different text and block quotes and things. This is just the demo content from Gutenberg. And then we can see all of our items here on the front end. And in Gutenberg, everything's a block, and that's kind of what we're talking about today, is extending beyond the core blocks and how do you dive in and create your own. So I'm going to start with Gutenberg for developers, and then Josh is going to dive in and talk about some more complex stuff and the things they've been doing with Gutenberg over at Caldera. So what you need to know, first of all, I would advise you to test your existing sites when WordPress 5.0 comes out. We've had the stable release cycle for a long time, so a lot of your clients or users are probably used to clicking that upgrade button, and you need to educate them on what Gutenberg is and test the sites to make sure that Gutenberg is going to be compatible with all of your projects that you have running. If you need a place to do that, Pantheon has free sandbox sites you can spin up, migrate your site over with our plugin, and then go ahead and install Gutenberg and test it. The other thing to be aware of is that Gutenberg is moving really, really fast. There's a new release every few weeks. This is just the GitHub page for the releases. And we can see just within the last month, we've had 4 releases. So it's moving quickly. Keep up on it. You can't just look at it once. So if you go try Gutenberg now and then you do nothing until the new version of WordPress comes out, there's going to be changes and there's going to be things that are different. So you need to keep up on it. You can't just peek at it one time. You really need to be prepared for this launch. And if you're on the development side, you can style core blocks to match your theme. So you don't have to stick with the default styles that come with it out of the box. You can actually go in and style items to match what you're doing. And if you're spinning up a new project, then consider working with Gutenberg now. If you kick off a project, and it takes 6 months to build, or even you get something launched before Gutenberg comes out, it will pretty quickly be outdated once Gutenberg does come out. And it is a nicer user experience for entering content. So if that's something that is going to be valuable to your clients, then consider using it for the next project. And so I get this question a lot. Do I need to know JavaScript? Well, yes, this is one of the controversial things, is it's a big switch from WordPress has traditionally been PHP. We've had some JavaScript with, jQuery and Backbone and some of the media elements and things and the customizer, but WordPress has largely been PHP. And now we have the shift to modern JavaScript going into Gutenberg. And you will need to know basic JavaScript in order to create blocks. You can use ES 2015, or some folks call it vanilla JavaScript, or you can use modern JavaScript if you like when developing with Gutenberg. I like to use modern JavaScript, and React should be something that's on your radar, because those are skills that are going to transfer. Once you start learning modern JavaScript to work with Gutenberg, that's going to transfer outside of WordPress as well. It's what the rest of the community is doing. So I would get familiar with that. And it gave me a reason. I took Wes Boss's course on like Intro to ES6, and then kind of just used it and played around with some demos, and Gutenberg has really given me a reason to bring that stuff into WordPress, which has been awesome. And with Gutenberg, we also have block templates. So this is something you can work with as a developer. There's filters. So we could take a look at some of this documentation here. The handbook is really good. It's pretty fleshed out and gives you code examples and things of what you can do. So there's black lists and white lists if you have certain post types that you want to remove blocks from, or only have certain blocks be allowed. You can do that sort of thing. You could possibly also do it by user. So if you had a restricted user rule and you didn't want them to use certain blocks, you could lock that down. There are post type block templates as well, which are pretty nice. These give you some really good placeholders. When you register your custom post type, you can actually go in and have this template argument, and then you can come in and pass the blocks that you want. So this one has an image, a heading, a paragraph, and we can come in and take a look at that. I have a custom post type here for team members. I added one for myself, and you can see sort of name, title, image. But now if someone comes in and hits new team member, there's these really nice placeholders. So full name, job title, place to upload an image, biography, these sorts of things. So you can come in and give this really great default state for people who are using your content. And this is a lot more intuitive than just some meta boxes that people fill out. And these placeholders are really nice. There is still some, it's kind of up in the air what's going on with traditional page templates. So if we come in here and take a look, if you've developed pages in the past, you know, on the right-hand side, you have page attributes. There might be templates that are, you could create one for a contact form or a certain type of landing page or whatever that is not a post type. And so this is still open on GitHub. That's where all the Gutenberg development is taking place. That's where a lot of the discussions are taking place. And I would encourage you to go in and read these discussions and see what's going on. So if templates are something that you use in a lot of your projects, then you should come in, follow along with these conversations, and then go in and register and actually voice your opinion. So we can see that people are coming here just voicing their opinion, showing some mock-ups of how they think this might work, etc., and what they're doing. And that's really valuable feedback to the Gutenberg team. So templates are really great. If you're developing a theme or developing something for clients, you want to start using Gutenberg, but that's still just kind of using the core blocks. And so I want to talk about a little bit about what blocks are, and then we'll dive in and look at how you can create some blocks. So there's two types of blocks. There's static blocks, and these are basically what goes into the editor is what comes out on the front end. So paragraphs, a p tag comes out on the front end, that's what's on the editor. The render callback is in JavaScript. This is the same thing with images. And then we have dynamic blocks. Dynamic blocks are JavaScript for the editor and actually the block creation process, but they're rendered by PHP on the front end. So we can think about things like latest posts, those sorts of items that are dynamic are going to actually be dynamic blocks. Because if we just saved our recent posts as is, then when we publish a new post, that's going to be out of date. So that has to be a dynamic block. And so come in here and just put one in so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And there we have Gutenberg demo. If I click on settings here, we have some settings over on the right. And so I'll go ahead and save that. One kind of neat thing here is we can switch to code editor. This has kind of been hidden a little bit, but we can see that our blocks have attributes. And here for our paragraphs and things, there's that p tag that's actually being saved. So Gutenberg blocks are delimited by these HTML comments, but if we come down and look for our latest post here, then we can see it's just this comment. And we can come in and change some items. So if I change columns and number of items and things, I can update this. And then if we go back and look at the code editor, we can actually see some additional attributes here. So we have post layout grid columns 4, and these are going to be passed to the render callback on the PHP side. So you'll have access to these attributes when you go to do your display on the front end. But there's not actually anything here, it's just this placeholder comment. So that's how you can tell if something's a dynamic block, and you'll need to work with that on the PHP side. This has been a little controversial because you're sort of repeating yourself. You have to write JavaScript for the editor experience, but then you have to go back and write PHP for the front end rendering. And so you're kind of repeating a little bit of code there.
Can I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
I think that because you're right, like that's a little, right? But it's important to keep in mind that you're showing how to do it the automatic way, which is it persisted to those comments. It could also persist to post meta. And therefore, maybe your render callback is just a little bit of HTML that sets off a React app that then pulls that data, right? And then you get into that weird meta zone, in between zone between like a dynamic block and a static block. And I think that controversy you just talked about, sometimes I just don't care because it's just so small, right? Like I have to write 2 things, who cares? But then it gets weird and complicated, and I think that's where you get into that sort of in-between zone.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of those development best practices, right? I try not to repeat myself and write the same thing twice, so it feels a little weird to do it, even though it's not that big of a deal if you're just, you know, outputting some HTML really quick. And so to create a block and actually create your own custom block, you need to register the block so Gutenberg is aware of it. This has to be done on the JavaScript side. You can optionally do it on the PHP side, which I've been preferring that lately and declaring my attributes and things in PHP. There's also a little bit of talk around like having the server be aware of all the blocks if they're only registered client side. Anything to say there, Josh?
Well, I'm curious as to why you said you prefer to do it with PHP side.
I just think it's the attribute registration. Honestly, it's when I go in and I just have the function for adding my block, you can enqueue your styles and everything. I kind of keep all that on the PHP side, and then JavaScript, I can just list out the name of the block and just start using things. Especially if I'm doing a dynamic block where the attributes are going to be consumed by PHP, it makes sense for me to declare them in PHP.
Okay, that makes sense. It's going to make testing like the block a little harder maybe in isolation, but I'm not sure I care because I'll test the components under it. So yeah, I like it. You've convinced me. I'm glad I came to this webinar.
Yeah, and then you'll need some JavaScript and CSS files for your block. So you have to register and enqueue both of those. Styles are kind of optional. You could sort of leave it alone. Like Google Map block doesn't have a lot of styles because it's just pulling in the Google map that's already styled. So there's not a lot there, but you definitely need to register JavaScript as well. And so there's some items that can help with this. WP CLI has some great commands for scaffolding blocks, and I actually went ahead and ran this earlier, and we can take a look at the output. So there's a cool command, WP scaffold block, that will register some of the stuff for you. And this was really helpful when getting started. And so we can come in here. I just created a plugin for WP CLI block. So we can see here, I use actually the command from WP CLI to create a plugin. That's where the grunt file and some of the tests and things came for. But we have this blocks directory. So if I look inside of there, I see this PHP file. We can go take a look at that. And so here's our an init function that's just registering our scripts. We have a couple dependencies here, WP Blocks, WP Element. These are some of the Gutenberg items that your JavaScript will want to make use of. So just like registering any other script, you want to have those dependencies listed out, and then registering some CSS as well. So we have an editor.css if you have styles that are just within the admin screen, and then we have a style.css for the front end. And you can see our register block type function here, what we were talking about that makes Gutenberg aware of your block. And so we can actually take a look at the JavaScript file as well. So this is going in, and Gutenberg is built on top of React, but you have this abstract layer. So we have WP element create element instead of React create element, but they work essentially the same way. So if you've worked with React before, this is going to be very familiar. If you haven't worked with React before, then Gutenberg does a lot of the lifting under the hood for you, which is kind of nice. So registering our block type, you do have to do this in JavaScript as well. So the Gutenberg client is aware of it. We give our block a title, we give it a category, and you have some optional items you can put in here. If we had any attributes, we would put them in here. And then this one is just outputting a paragraph tag that says hello from the editor on the back end and hello from the saved content on the front end. So I'm going to go in. Let's actually, one thing you'll have to do after you run this command is, if I take a look at just my main plugin file I scaffolded, it's not including any of my block code. So I'll just have to include this in there. And now we can go turn on this plugin and see what we get. So I'll just go back to my Gutenberg demo post here, and we'll switch over to visual mode. And there is my WP CLI block, hello from the editor, which is what we saw being there in our edit callback. And then on the front end, hello from the save content. So we have this edit callback, and we have a save callback to define what's actually going to be in the editor versus on the front end, because you're going to have controls and all sorts of things that go in the editor that aren't going to be published on the front end. So this is a quick example of a static block because we're just saving straight HTML markup. This goes into the database as is, but really kind of an easy way to get started rather than having to go in and register everything yourself. Is with WP CLI, it is using vanilla JavaScript. So if you want to get up to speed with modern JavaScript, then there's this package called Create Guten Block. It uses Webpack and a lot of the modern tools under the hood, but it takes care of all the building and everything for you, which is really, really nice. So you can check this out. I'll go back and I have one more plugin for this. So we have Create Guten Block. Again, I just scaffold a plugin with WP CLI and then ran this. So if we edit our plugin.php, we can see Create Guten Block. It's pulling in this init. So let's go take a look at this. So this is the same sort of thing we're doing, we got from the WP CLI scaffold. We're enqueuing some of our CSS. We're enqueuing our JavaScript and some editor styles. So pretty basic here, but this time we have actually a source and we have a dist. And so source is the code we'll be editing. We can write in modern JavaScript, and then you can do npm run build, and it will actually compile things and build out all of the assets for you. So you don't have to worry about setting up Webpack or anything else. This is kind of, you run it, it scaffolds things for you, it runs the build for you. It's pretty nice. But if we go look at that source,
I just wanted to point out, if you're familiar with Create React App, that does something very similar for React apps. Yeah, this is the Gutenberg block equivalent.
Yeah. So we'll go in and edit our block.js here, and you can see it's importing styles from Sass straight in here to the JavaScript. We have some ES6 deconstruction going on. We can come in and here's title and things. One thing that I thought was really cool with Gutenberg is you can actually work on translations and things similar to how you can in PHP. I still haven't figured out how you can generate like pot files and things from this, but it's kind of cool that the double underscore and some of these other functions we're used to in PHP are there in JavaScript as well. And then our edit function here, you can see it taking in props, which is a very React way to name things. So props.className, this is going to be the class that Gutenberg wants our item to have. We can go ahead and put that in, and this is a little bit of JSX, which is like HTML in your JavaScript. So you can see this is quite a bit different than the vanilla JavaScript we were looking at earlier. But this just says hello from the back end, and then hello from the front end. So if we were to activate this plugin and save it, it would be very similar to what we saw with the WP CLI block, where we have hello from the back end and the front end. But these are both ways to, depending on if you want to work with vanilla JavaScript or you want to try some of the new stuff, I recommend checking out WP CLI and create Gutenberg block, so you're not starting completely from scratch. And just some, yeah, uses ES 2015 versus modern JavaScript, just whatever you want to go with. And with Create Gutenberg block, if you want to customize things and you are an advanced Webpack user and things like that, you can eject from it and totally customize it. But then you won't get their updates and things like that. So if you eject, you're kind of on your own. So it's for advanced users who know what they're doing. And then just a couple of items here. Gutenberg GitHub and the official handbook are great places to go learn. If we go look at GitHub, there's really, really, really awesome documentation. So I come into like the blocks directory here, and you can see the README with getting started and how do you enqueue your JavaScript and things. This is what WP CLI and Create Gutenberg block were doing for us, but if you wanted to do this yourself, you could as well. And then they have some examples. So here's the PHP side, here's the JavaScript side. And then I'll link to the example in modern JavaScript as well if you're interested in that. So really, really great docs here. The handbook we kind of saw earlier with the template documentation and things. You can actually subscribe to updates on make.wordpress.org. So there's a Gutenberg tag. And if you come in and put your email address here, you can subscribe to this, and then you'll get an email every time there's new Gutenberg releases and things like that. So here's all tags Gutenberg, like here's one, what's new in Gutenberg? And so nice kind of summary. So I really enjoy these emails to help keep up on it. And then Gutenberg Times is a great curated list of resources. So there's a ton of chatter going on about Gutenberg in the WordPress space. If you want to filter the noise a little bit, check out Gutenberg Times. And with that intro there to kind of blocks and how to get started creating some simple blocks, I'm going to pass it off to Josh to talk about some more advanced implementation and the things they've been doing with blocks in Caldera.
And Josh, before you launch in, if you could hold the mic a little closer when you speak, some of our audience, they're not hearing you as crystal clear as they would like.
How about now? Is this better?
Fabulous.
This is great.
Launch right back into blocks.
Okay, great. So Andrew, where were we? I can't see the slides.
We're at real world blocks.
Okay, yeah. So I guess I wanted to show kind of how I got to here, which is a very modular block. Like this is the move that out of the way. This is the current state of like the Caldera Forms block, and if we look at it, this is the render callback, which is just a bunch of containers for other components. And I'm using inspector controls, and that's something that we wanted to talk about here, which is reusing different components from Gutenberg Gutenberg provides to us in our user interface. And another example here would be placeholder. So I want to talk about that, but let me back up a step and kind of show in December when we first added a block, I think I made a pretty good go at it for not really knowing what I was doing at the time. But I did make some interesting mistakes. I want to show you a simple block and why we got more modular. So
While you do that, I'll just say inspector controls are really awesome. Gutenberg has a ton of elements out of the box. When I created my first block, I was like doing my own text input and things and didn't realize there was this whole library of components that I could start using. So I would definitely say don't try and recreate the wheel and read some of the docs and see what Gutenberg has available.
Right. And so if you want to see, I started off by reinventing the wheel. For example, this is me, this is using the create element that Andrew was looking at before. I created a span with the spinner as active class. There is in the components file directory of Gutenberg, there's a spinner element that you can use. But in here, you're also going to find, look at this, I'm building a select control using that, right? And the other thing that, right, so this entire form chooser, there's just a lot of code here that was done because we didn't have access to or didn't know about all these other components in December. And so this is sort of similar to how we used to have to do it in terms of we would use PHP or jQuery or whatever to build out our own controls. And then the other thing that I did here that I was not in love with was that I had, compared to what we have now, is that I actually reused the toolbar in this, the formatting toolbar component. If you see, that's called block controls, or at least was then. Instead of using the sidebar. So if we switch back to where we are today, I believe this file disappears. This is now using a file that is in, if you are looking on GitHub on Caldera Forms, there are links to all this in the slides. We have our blocks now, and so again, this is where we were, but I'm now using this inspector controls, which is WP blocks.inspector controls. And if we go to github.com/WordPress/Gutenberg, we can actually get a really good sense of what's available there by going to controls. Where did they put that now? Is it in components, I think? Andrew, do you remember where they moved it?
A bit.
It's where?
Oh, can you zoom in just a bit?
Oh, yeah.
There's components right there.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, how do you zoom in on a Mac? There you go. And so then we can see that we have like a checkbox control. We have a button group. We have a draggable, right? We have like the very simple stuff like a button. And it tells us in a lot of these cases what our props are. So if we want to use a button, we can import this and we can tell it, is it primary, right? WordPress, that gets blue in the default scheme, but that'll give us compatibility with all the different schemes and future changes. And so if we go back to my code editor here, you can see that we now have a form chooser component. And this imports select control, wp.components.select control. So we can assume that there must be a select here, select control. And so I went here and looked at this and said, that's how you do it. I had all this information, label, help, multiple options. And so that allows us to have just that. It's an isolated thing. And then by default, we just pass props.formID in to tell what's the current form that's been selected, and then we pass in a options, this map of forms, and then we loop through using a iterator here. But I'm also wrapping it with wp.data. I don't want to get too into this, but part of it, but WP data is WordPress's Redux-like store. So this is how I'm able to use one single source of truth for all my Caldera Forms data, which is all kind of down here. I have my API, and I have a store that gets me, my form previews and that sort of thing. So now I have a form chooser component. So this is a modular component that I can use with or without WordPress. Because it's just React, I would just need to make sure that wp.components.select control is in scope, and all those packages are supposed to go to npm sooner than later. There's progress being made on that. There's only so much time and effort that can go into that. So eventually we'll be able to npm install wp.components, which would be great for backwards compatibility reasons. And then if we go back to my block, I'm importing my form chooser, and then I'm wrapping it in this placeholder. When we were looking at Andrew's screen, we saw like he added the image and it had that placeholder. I want to make something that looks exactly the same. Consistency in UI is important. So let's actually go ahead and just create a contact post, I guess. If I add my Caldera form block, I'm in HTML mode. I see this placeholder that looks very similar to the image placeholder. And I really, really like that in terms of I don't want to reinvent the wheel anymore like we too often had to do in WordPress. This is that control here. I select my contact form. It grabs the HTML from the server. If we bring out the sidebar here, in my block controls for this, this is the same chooser here. These are just random forms I had. But that you can see is inside of inspector controls. Inspector controls is what's going over here on the right side. So it's the same component, but by keeping it modular, right, when we looked in here, we didn't see the wrapper for that. I kept it outside of that so I could use the same thing with and without that placeholder. So that way my state, if I don't have one chosen, let's just go ahead and add another one, is the nice looking placeholder. And then the other one is if we actually have a form ID. And that's just making use of JSX conditionals, which look funny. I love JSX. JSX conditionals are weird. But this is saying if false equals attributes dot form ID, then I don't know why two and signs do this. And then this is kind of the reverse because there is no else. Anything more than that, I would just use a conditional before return. But that gives us the ability to have a basic user interface here that is dynamic, is making use of everything that WordPress provides us, and therefore has a consistent look with WordPress. And the that's one big advantage that we've found so far with Gutenberg that I'm excited about and want to go further with, put more controls here, use Gutenberg for more things. The other big thing that we need to think about, though, is backwards compatibility. I can't just tell everybody they have to use Gutenberg now. They have to upgrade to WordPress 5 when it comes out. We have 100,000 some websites using this. We have to have the shortcode support. So I wanted to show how that works because Andrew touched on it earlier. In my block, one of the things I'm doing is registering my attribute form ID, which is now repetitive. This is what Andrew and I were talking about earlier. But the thing that I've left over from when I used a mod's boilerplate to start the original block is this callback here. I should point out this is just a utility function to like print the assets and then make sure that this variable that I'm using to get the names of the forms into that selector is printed using WP localized script, very similar to the way we've always done it. So this is this function Caldera forms render CF form block. That is my render callback. If you see down here, this is where I'm registering the block. First, I'm checking if the register block type function exists because I don't want to cause an error. That's my big concern, backwards compatibility. Right now, the only thing that I would have to worry about is this function not existing. So I'm checking there. And then you'll see I did duplicate those attributes and it's bothering me now. But that means that this callback function here, right? Boom, it's this, will get called every time WordPress is trying to render a post. It sees, if we go to this HTML here, it's going to see WP Caldera form / C form, and then it's going to get this array. That's how it knows the form ID. And then when it does that, it will get that and pass it to Caldera form to render form. And that is very similar to how our shortcode callback works. Right? It takes the attribute called form ID from the shortcode attributes and it passes it to Caldera form to render form. So that way, this is like our little bridge from the new way to our existing render function. It does exactly the same way that it does with the shortcode. And that gives us our forward compatibility and make sure that the block editor is really just an interface for controlling something that's not new in any way.
So Josh, even if you had a simple block that maybe didn't need to be dynamic and rendered by PHP due to complexity, is that something you recommend for backwards compatibility?
Well, the thing is that as soon as I would have to start reproducing code for the render, right? Like I have a shortcode that calls some function. As soon as it's any more than a line or two of code, then I'm having to keep the two in sync by a cut and paste, right?
Yeah.
That's offensive. Whereas this, I'm just gonna have to keep mapping attributes from blocks to the thing that's designed to take exactly those attributes, right? Like this takes defaults and things like that. That's all I'm doing. I'm just building a bridge between one API and the other, not reproducing things in two places. Because my shortcode callback looks basically the same.
Yeah, and on the user side, it's much better because like with my maps block, if that was the shortcode, people, did I call it location or address? They have to remember all those attributes and things in there. And with Gutenberg, it's a lot cleaner. And you can still do the same thing on the back end to render it out pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for as terms of just building a bridge, like you can think of this as the bridge between this being the render callback that you registered here. It's the bridge between the block world and the shortcode world. And I suspect that one day we'll have a different type of block that doesn't use the shortcode, right? But we'll be at that point where the shortcode's kind of diminished right? It's a backwards compatibility thing we don't think about, and we're not going to be at that place anytime soon. Were there other topics you wanted me to cover, Andrew, while we're here?
No,
do
you just want to. No, we had like talking about render callback, attributes, first block callback, backwards compatibility, and then you had a link for Caldera Forms, UI blocks init.php, which is I think what we're looking at right now.
Yep.
So, yeah, we talked about core components, so inspector controls and some of those, and not reinventing the wheel. So yeah, reuse what's already there for UI consistency. It makes your life easier. You don't have to rewrite that code. And then, you know, we talked about you can write vanilla JavaScript, but I would really encourage folks to try the modern JavaScript, especially so you can get away from a monolithic code file and just the things being able to import.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Can we go back there? It's so nice that, like, I didn't like React until I gave it another shot because of WordPress. And now I'm like annoyed that, you know, all this Gutenberg stuff isn't always there, and that like I have stuff in view. It's worth giving it a shot. Like, this is the new WordPress way, and it's a really good way to write code. Like, I've been working on our GDPR privacy screen, which is a complete React app that has almost nothing to do with WordPress, except for it just uses like wp.element to actually render JSX. But it's sharing stuff with my blocks. Now, so I have this React app, single page app for controlling the privacy settings, and it's importing stuff that's getting used in the blocks. It's sharing state stuff. Right now, the only reason it has it, like for backwards compatibility reasons, I have a form chooser that, you know, uses like Bootstrap instead of Gutenberg. But that's just because of the data part isn't there, or the components aren't available via NPM yet. It's really a nice way to work. And I think it's worth investing in learning React because of WordPress. And WordPress makes it easy. Like, WordPress tends to make learning new things easy.
Yeah, I will say don't like try and go from 0 to 100 in one session, right? And be like, oh my gosh, I have to learn JSX and React and this Redux state stuff, and like get there over time. Start with, you know, using Create Guten block or something that's going to help you with the workflow. Get a simple block going, and then try and add some inspector controls and just work your way up, and you'll get there. But as you start down that path, it's worth the journey because it is a much nicer way to work.
Yeah, I'm looking for a good example of something that's mildly complex JavaScript, JSX, but it's still, you know, it reminds me of a lot of the ways that I tried to write PHP like functions to generate UI in the past. You know, with like using double quotes with curly brackets and stuff like that you can sort of do in PHP. But it looks like HTML. I think it's in their pure functions makes them very easy to test with Jest and things like that. And I don't know, I think it's going to really help the quality of WordPress if we all sort of stick to a framework that knows how to interact with the DOM on a level beyond what humans can do.
Yeah. And then do we want to talk a little bit about props flowing down from Gutenberg?
Yeah. So this is really important. So in React, we have this concept of props, and props are the arguments that a component takes. So for example, I have this form chooser component, and it gets passed props forms, and then it's able to map that out to make the options, and it gets one called form ID. That always flows down. So we can think of WordPress as supplying the props. In this case, it gets called attributes. in that we're able to say use here at attributes.formID, right? I'm flowing those down. But I also am flowing down a prop called onChange, right? Because sometimes properties need to change. These things seem very simple until you start having to go in the other direction back up. And I'm leaving the responsibility of the change to outside of the component, because that way it's agnostic to where it's mounted. As soon as I like try and put that function inside the component like has to only be in certain places. So now it just takes a function, which is cool because WordPress has set attributes, which as you can see, I'm taking from the block here. I'm using object deconstruction to get it. If I just did props, I would have to do props to set attributes. But that's a React set state basically, effectively. So I'm just passing it the new value of the form, right? Set this form ID to there. And this is a function in the scope of the edit callback. So this renders the edit interface that I then pass into the scope of my form chooser. And that's really cool because that means I can reuse it in another situation. This form chooser is just a function here that allows me to render those things. Doesn't matter where it comes from in this case, right? And it calls this function, passes new value back to there. So in this case, that's the set attributes function in WordPress. But it could be the set state in a React component. It could be set state in a, it could dispatch an action into Redux, which is basically, well, this is selecting for Redux. It's selecting that forms using the select API that is in WordPress, which is fun. It's a different topic.
Well, that's like one thing I've really liked about working with React and Gutenberg is I'll start developing components and then I'm like, oh man, I have too much in here. I want to reuse some of this, or I want to reuse this component somewhere else. I need to break it up until you're down to like, I just have an arrow function that returns. And it makes your code so modular and it kind of forces you to work that way.
Yeah, so I've been really getting into testing these components with Jest. Like that's been kind of the last few days what I've been focusing on. Jest is Facebook's unit testing framework. And it's almost into snapshots and things like that. It almost feels cheating just because you're testing so well. Because they become so modular. And it means that once you get it right and you have a test that proves it's right, like you just can't break it. Yeah. And you can't misuse it. Especially if you use prop types package, which you don't have to use in React, it's not included, but it lets you basically declare what the properties types are. So it has to have an object called this, or there's an error. You combine that with unit tests that check for those errors. It's really hard to break this stuff, which is really exciting, I think, again, for the stability of WordPress that we start moving that direction.
Well, keeping on that note, I think you're going to be talking about some more of this stuff, especially like using React-powered things at the JavaScript for WordPress conference coming up.
Oh yeah, so JavaScript for WP.com online. Is it free?
I think so, yeah.
Zach's gonna hate me if I say it's not. According to Josh, it's free, so just show up. So Zach Gordon is organizing this awesome conference with a really great lineup of speakers on like JavaScript and WordPress, especially around Gutenberg. And so I'm literally talking about this stuff with select and then with data, where you're able, or with dispatch, these two components in WordPress that allow you to like wrap your components in a Redux-like store. So we'll be talking a little bit about Redux in React, but really about WP data as a Redux-like store. That's going to make creating really dynamic blocks. There's relationships between different blocks, potentially in nested blocks. Those kind of things are still a little tricky to do. But now that WP data is basically there, they're a lot simpler, and I'm excited about that. So we talked about that at the JavaScript for WP conference.
Yeah. And I'm going to be talking about testing and where CI fits into all this, sort of building more modern JavaScript. So I'll hit you up for your thoughts on Jest and all of those things.
Yeah, but I'm gonna like watch your talk to learn the stuff.
Oh, awesome. Pressure's on. But yeah, I think we're getting close to the top of the hour here. So let's show off some resources and some things that helped us learn. I really liked, there's been some podcasts and things. There was one that actually went up on the CSS Tricks podcast, I think it's Shop Talk Show, that actually had Tammy and Matthias, who are the design and the tech lead for Gutenberg. And they went on and just, Chris Coyer and some of those guys just asked them things about Gutenberg from a completely agnostic perspective. So a little bit outside of the WordPress bubble, and talking about it and all those things. So that's a really good listen. The other one kind of from my list here is there was a talk at Google I/O really recently, just here at the beginning of May, that was talking about WordPress and AMP, but in it, they actually demo a theme that they built using AMP and Gutenberg together to make this like really awesome customizable theme that's also super, super fast. So that's a good one. And then Gutenberg Times, we kind of talked about earlier, but that's just like a really great curated list. There's a website, newsletter, and then you can follow them on Twitter and stuff as well. And they just constantly are posting updates and all the things you need to go check out. And then Josh, you've got like a big list of some code repos for people to look at too. I think you're muted.
I was muted. Everybody was happy. These are links to like mainly repos that we've been working on and like stuff from WordCamps, WordCamp Miami, WordCamp Jacksonville this year. There was a lot of good example code from this alert block I used for both of those. It's a block that gives you like a dynamic bootstrap alert. What I did was, if you look in the commit history, it kind of walks through going from like a very basic block that was from Brian Richards built for WordCamp Miami, and then I followed up with the talk after of how to make that more complex. So I kind of committed his to this repo and then added Webpack, though I stole that from Zach. And then, but we stole that all from Riyadh's GCF, which is a great thing to read. That should be on this list. And then I kind of walked through like rewriting it to use Webpack and ESX and JSX and like importing CSS from other stuff, and then like using the React Bootstrap component library to render part of the user interface. And in this case, it's Bootstrap alert, but you know, it could have been anything. So it's kind of going from this like static block where you just kind of like write a message to like fallbacks, and it updates, and it's a React component on both, you know, same thing in the front end as in the back end, in the safe callback in the front end rendering. So it's simple, but it starts to show how you can get into that weird kind of zone between static blocks and React apps in the front end, which is where I think the fun happens.
Yeah, and you don't need to build a full React app on the front end. You can have like within these blocks little templates and sections of your site be progressive and get a little bit better without redoing the whole thing. So yeah.
And so then that B. Richards / Gunadev, that's Brian Richards built for the whole WordCamp Miami. Yeah. There's a lot of good blocks in there. And I don't know if that video is out there yet, but it's good video. It's there. And so, but there's slides and stuff. I'd also recommend and then there's links to like our blocks in Caldera forms, and then I've been looking at borrowing from and using both Human Made and Web Dev Studios have open sourced their kind of block collections they're using. That Human Made one has new controls that if you go into JS, you might want to zoom a little, by the way. Oh yeah, so JS and then controls, like link posts, they're doing a really good job of taking existing components and making them into new things that are useful and that we could reuse. So I thought that was a good one to look at. Also, they make good use of prop types there at the bottom. I mentioned that before. I really love doing this. Pretty common in the React world. This is the prop types package where you say, this has to have a label. It has to be a string. This could have help. If it does, it has to be a string. Or in terms of value, right? It's like it has to be a number. It has to be an array of numbers. So that really helps, especially once you start running tests or static analysis. Really helps to like raise errors up and prevent you from using it wrong or making backwards. Accidentally breaking backwards compatibility is like the hardest thing in maintaining code. When you use prop types and have some automated process for checking them through code, say test, it becomes super obvious immediately when you've messed up and broken backwards compatibility accidentally, not later on.
Well, that's really nice writing your tests, because if you're expecting a string, you don't have to worry about all these edge cases or test for them because it's already handled for you.
Yeah, so like I'm used to like in PHP unit going like, get this thing that I actually want to test. Okay, this
is it really an array?
Is it an array? Does it have this key? Does it have this, right? A certain array has key. So I feel like I'm cheating in jest. But it's like, yeah, but those would have thrown an exception if I had screwed that up. Okay, I like it. It's easy. In WDS, these are good basic blocks here that are worth reading, and probably if you build WordPress sites, just using.
Nice.
They have like
hero, call to action.
Yeah, they have, and they're doing, it's good use of what's existing in Gutenberg and what's in React. But there's useful, like the GitHub one, right? Like that's a GIST embed that they don't have, and then these multi-select grids, and I don't know, it's good stuff to look at. And if you're more on the side of site building and you're like, oh, I might need to build some custom blocks, check out what other web development agencies are building, because there's a lot of good stuff on GitHub. And if there's not, put it out there.
Sweet. And I think we got some time for a few questions here.
Yeah, I'll sneak a few in here even though we're over time. The first question is, what solution for React state management does Gutenberg use, i.e. Redux, new context API, etc.?
So it uses a Redux-like state. If you go to on the Gutenberg handbook, there's a section for data, wp.data. It is very much like Redux, but it's just important to mention that it's not. Like we say that the wp.create element is like React create element. Like, yeah, it's literally just an alias. This is different. Like it has selectors baked in, which is cool, which you wouldn't normally get. It prevents you having to use like the map props to state map dispatch, fill in the words I'm missing here. And it kind of auto wires it all because you have this register store function that you pass a reducer to, just like a normal Redux reducer. Actions, which are actions that you might have in Redux. I'll scroll down. And then it like auto wires selectors, which is really cool. So you can use these to like subscribe, and their core editor has selectors. So you can like subscribe to changes in the post title using these. And then those resolvers are really neat because if you look, there's that selector get price. The first time you call that, it runs this resolver get price, which actually goes and gets the prices via the REST API. So it's a really neat Redux-like data management system. I know that there's been some use of the context API under the hood, but predominantly it's the wp.data, which is Redux-like.
And I would say with any of this stuff, if you're wondering how it works or what's a good way to use it, check out the core blocks and what they're doing, because all of these items are being consumed by the core blocks. So if you want to look at how they're doing things, some of those kind of nuances and what you should and shouldn't do, then take a look at those.
Yeah, definitely check Gutenberg out from WordPress, from GitHub. And then you have to do npm run build to build it. But it's worth reading. There's wisely a lot of stuff that gets removed to ship it to WordPress.org as a plugin, right? They just ship like the built JavaScript, not all the source files, which is the correct decision. But as a developer, you should be reading what's going on in there. Like, it's really well done. Examples of how to use Gutenberg, because it's, Gutenberg.
All right. Next question is, it's a long one, so stay with me here. Is there a means to conditionally use Gutenberg for specific post types? I would like to utilize Gutenberg for a specific plugin that may be deployed on a MU network using the classic editor, but wish to avoid network-wide compatibility testing.
Yes. When you declare a post type, this is in the handbook, I think under extensibility, you have to opt in to Gutenberg. So Gutenberg, the plugin, adds this automatically to posts and pages. That's all it does. So by default, a post type is classic editor. So if your concern is that you're going to, this post type is going to have a problem with Gutenberg, just disable it. Also, meta boxes have the ability to be marked as Gutenberg incompatible, if that's a concern. But then the other thing is that you can enable it for a specific post type and disable it for, say, the core post pages, if that's what you want, right? If you're saying, hey, I'm not going to use Gutenberg for posts on my site for whatever reason, but I do want this plugin that has a custom post type that needs Gutenberg, you can do that. You just have to manually unregister.
Well, and compatibility testing is tough, because I think right now, if you have other plugins and things that aren't Gutenberg compatible, it's kind of like all or nothing, right? So if you have this big site network and there's a bunch of stuff in there that's not going to be Gutenberg compatible, then I don't think you can just get by without testing that stuff, because it will, it'll suck your plugin back into classic edit mode also.
Right, so that's what I was saying. In the MetaBox API, you can write now, when you do the normal register MetaBox, you can say whether or not it's Gutenberg compatible, Gutenberg not compatible, or as fallback. Like, it's Gutenberg compatible, but go ahead and use it because other reasons you've fallen back to Gutenberg. So, there's plenty of information in the handbook to kind of figure that one out, depending on the actual need.
All right, next question is more of a inquiry. Can you guys repeat a little bit of information about the conference you were both speaking at?
Yes, it's JavaScript for WP.com /conference. Thank you to Andrew's browser history. This is hosted by Zach Gordon, who does JavaScript for WordPress. And look at all those confirmed speakers there. It is in fact free. It is on Friday, June 29th. Tanya's talking about just kind of architecture. What does this all mean now that we have to do this again? And Tammy's talking about a lot of the design elements. Tammy is one of the main designers on this project, so it's really great to hear from her how you can use this stuff from a design perspective. It's not totally about Gutenberg, but there's a lot of Gutenberg stuff here.
Yeah, it's JavaScript in general, but I think you'll, especially if you're learning JavaScript and things, check it out. And they're actually still open for speaker applications. So there are some confirmed speakers, but if you have something that you want to share with the world, I would encourage you to apply to speak as well.
Yeah, you'll get a free ticket too.
A free ticket to the free conference.
But it's an exclusive free ticket. I'm going to sneak one more question in. Where do my blocks go in a theme or plugin?
So I like to put blocks in plugins, because if you switch themes, you want to keep that functionality around. And what themes should do is really style the blocks. So Gutenberg even has images and galleries and block quotes and all of these things out of the box. the job of the theme is to style those, which is really great for front-end developers because now they just get this HTML and they style it right, and they don't have to worry about all the things they've had to worry about with WordPress previously. They can just start writing CSS and take advantage of a lot of that stuff.
Can I answer the 20% answer on that? Right, like that's like the 80% of the time correct answer. Right, so here's some interesting edge cases. One is you're building a theme, so it's like that has custom styles for blocks, your blocks or core blocks, right? So those that CSS would go in the theme, like Andrew said. So that's where it starts to get a little blurry. So here's the weird one: is that if you look at wp.hooks, you can actually modify blocks. Like when they're registered, they run through a hook in JavaScript. It's essentially a filter, and you can modify the blocks. So the secret sauce of your plugin might be that it adds special stuff to blocks. And I sort of kind of can make a case that would go in your theme, right? Adding like an additional control that, like, let's say that you wanted your theme had a background color for page layout setting, right? And you wanted to optionally make it so the images use that or use the inverse of that as their border color, right? You wouldn't want to create your own image block that everybody switched to. No, you'd want to modify the core block using whatever that hook is to add that one extra control. Is that a theme setting now? Yes. So does it belong to the theme or a companion plugin, right? Like that's where I would start to get a little worried.
Yeah, well, it's different than creating your own block, though, right? So if you're just straight up creating a block,
this is like a 5% answer now, right? I'm saying that there's some interesting gray area, but because we're able to do new and interesting things with themes. Like my theme can impose its color scheme on the core blocks is kind of an interesting concept. Or my theme can enforce its gallery layouts that it likes, right? Like my theme is designed to go with these two, gallery type A, not gallery type B. So it might change that. That's kind of
my theme could blacklist certain blocks that I don't have styled for or don't want to show up.
Yeah, that's going to affect content. That's a little weird, right? I don't know.
But
maybe.
It's that kind of like Twilight Zone of, you know, there's some good like standard best practice stuff, but a lot of it is to be seen.
Yeah, and I'm excited about with Gutenberg that like some of these things don't apply. Could be fun.
All right, guys, that's more than all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, please visit our website where you'll find a contact us page, and make sure you also join us next week at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern for part 4 of our series, Getting Your Sites Ready for Gutenberg with Daniel Bachhuber. We'll be counting down to WordCamp Europe. Thanks so much, Andrew and Josh, and have a great week, everyone.